George Clooney became one of Hollywood's most enduring icons. The unforgettable Dr. Doug Ross from ER, the legendary Danny Ocean from Ocean's 11, and the man millions believed had conquered everything: fame, fortune, and a life most people could only dream of. But behind the perfect image of control was a man shaped by the very things he could never control. At 13, Bell's palsy challenged the confidence of the young boy who would one day become one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces. For 16 years, rejection followed him relentlessly, nearly burying the dream he refused to let go of, until R finally changed his destiny. A serious spinal injury forced him to confront overwhelming pain, while personal losses reminded him that even the greatest success cannot control everything. Now at 65, George Clooney faces the question success could never answer. What remains of the man behind the legend when even control has its limits? Join us as we uncover the hidden story behind George Clooney's rise, struggles, and the truths behind the fame the world never saw. To understand the man behind the legend, we have to return to the beginning, before the awards, before the fame, and before the world knew the name George Clooney. There was only a young boy in Kentucky, learning how to find confidence in a world that had already taught him what it felt like to be different. Born on May 6, 1961, in Lexington, Kentucky, George grew up surrounded by entertainment and public life. His father, Nick Clooney, was a respected television host and journalist. His mother, Nina Bruce, was a former beauty queen and city councilwoman, and his aunt Rosemary Clooney was already a legendary name in music and film. From the outside, George appeared to have every advantage: a famous family, a creative environment, and a path connected to success. But a famous family could open doors. It could not protect him from the private battles that would shape the person he became. At 13 years old, George faced one of the most defining struggles of his life when Bell's palsy affected the left side of his face. For nearly 9 months, one eye would not close properly, and one side of his face could not move normally. To others, it was a temporary medical condition. But to a teenager trying to understand himself, it became something far deeper. It was not just about losing movement on one side of his face. It was the terrifying feeling of losing confidence in how the world would see him. The condition challenged more than his appearance. It changed the way he entered a room, the way he saw himself, and the way he feared others saw him. Years later, Clooney reflected on that period by saying, "I thought it was the worst thing in the world. I thought it would ruin my life." But instead of allowing that fear to define him, George discovered something unexpected. Humor became his camouflage. If he could make people laugh, he could control the moment before anyone else could decide how to see him. The confidence and charm audiences would later admire were not simply gifts he was born with. They were shaped through uncertainty, discomfort, and the experience of finding strength when he felt most exposed. That lesson followed him long after Bell's palsy disappeared. George searched for his place through sports, and later through acting. He became a talented athlete in high school and pursued baseball seriously enough to try out for the Cincinnati Reds in 1977. When that opportunity ended early, it became another reminder that talent alone could not guarantee success. After high school, Hollywood was not waiting for him. There were no shortcuts, no instant recognition, and no promise that his dream would come true. Before the world knew his name, Clooney worked ordinary jobs far away from movie premieres and awards ceremonies. He cut tobacco in Kentucky fields, sold insurance door to door, and stocked shelves. Those forgotten years created the side of George Clooney audiences would rarely see later. A man who understood rejection, patience, and uncertainty. The world would eventually celebrate his effortless charm, but those years built the person behind it. Hollywood eventually came to see George Clooney as the definition of confidence, elegance, and control. But the man who would become one of the industry's most respected figures once spent years wondering if anyone would ever recognize what he could become. In his early 20s, when Clooney arrived in Los Angeles chasing an acting career, he carried ambition but no guarantee that anyone would remember his name. His father, Nick Clooney, was already a respected television host and journalist, and his aunt Rosemary Clooney was a legendary singer and actress. But a famous family could only open a conversation. It could not guarantee a career. Hollywood still demanded persistence. Throughout his 20s and early 30s, Clooney faced the uncertainty many actors experience. Endless auditions, short-lived roles, and opportunities that disappeared before they could change everything. In an industry obsessed with youth and instant success, every passing year without a breakthrough carried a painful question. Was his dream still possible? His appearances in Centennial, The Facts of Life, Baby Talk, and Bodies of Evidence were steps forward, but not the moment that changed his life. Hollywood saw another struggling actor searching for a chance, not yet the storyteller he was fighting to become. Those years tested more than his career. They tested his belief that persistence would eventually matter. Clooney continued returning after rejection, even when there was no guarantee recognition would ever come. By the early 1990s, after more than a decade of chasing opportunities, he was still searching for the role that could finally change his life. He was no longer simply chasing fame. He was fighting against the possibility that fame might never arrive. Then, in 1994, the opportunity he had waited for finally came. Clooney was cast as Dr. Doug Ross on NBC's ER, the role that transformed his career and introduced him to millions of viewers. The character's confidence, warmth, and emotional depth revealed qualities audiences would later associate with Clooney for decades. Looking back, he described how important that moment was, saying, "That show saved me. I was broke. I was almost out of chances." Behind those words was the story of a man who had spent years wondering whether persistence would ever become success. The role did not erase the years of rejection. It gave those years a meaning. ER did not simply make George Clooney famous. It finally allowed the world to see what he had been fighting to prove all along. The success of ER became the beginning of a larger transformation. Instead of simply enjoying fame, Clooney used it to prove he was more than a television star. In the late 1990s, films such as From Dusk Till Dawn, Out of Sight, and Batman and Robin became part of his evolution, with each achievement and mistake shaping the artist he would become. In 2001, Ocean's 11 changed his place in Hollywood forever. As Danny Ocean, Clooney embodied the sophistication and confidence audiences admired. Yet the irony remained. The man who portrayed characters always in control had built his own life through years of uncertainty he could never control. For Clooney, success was no longer about proving he belonged in Hollywood. It was about finding the stories he wanted his name to represent. With Good Night and Good Luck, 2005, he stepped behind the camera and proved he could do more than perform a story. He could shape one. His journey continued through Syriana, Michael Clayton, The Ides of March, and Argo, where he expanded his influence as an actor, director, and storyteller. By then, the honors represented something deeper than recognition. They represented the journey behind them, the rejection, doubt, and forgotten years that shaped the man the world finally celebrated. His Oscars, Golden Globes, BAFTAs, and worldwide recognition were not simply symbols of success. They were proof of everything that came before. The world finally saw the confidence, charm, and Hollywood icon beneath the spotlight. But the journey behind that image belonged to the years when almost no one was watching. George Clooney's greatest achievement was never avoiding failure. It was carrying every setback, every uncertainty, and every forgotten year until the struggles that once questioned his future became the very foundation of the man the world finally recognized. At the height of George Clooney's success, when the world saw an actor who appeared to have mastered everything, fame, confidence, and control, he faced a challenge no role could prepare him for. In 2005, while filming Syriana, Clooney suffered a serious spinal injury during a stunt sequence that became one of the most difficult physical experiences of his life. The accident caused a spinal fluid leak and intense pain that affected his daily life and forced him to confront a vulnerability he had rarely experienced before. For a man famous for portraying calm, powerful characters who remained composed under pressure, The injury created a painful contrast. The person who spent his career bringing strength to the screen suddenly found himself facing a situation where determination alone could not immediately restore what his body had lost. At first, Clooney believed the injury was something he could overcome with time. But as the pain continued, his world became smaller. There were moments when even sitting upright became a challenge, when ordinary movements demanded more effort than anyone around him could understand. The world continued seeing the same silver-haired Hollywood icon, but behind closed doors, Clooney was fighting a battle that reduced life to the smallest movements. The confidence audiences admired was replaced by uncertainty that remained invisible to everyone outside his private world. Years later, Clooney spoke honestly about how dark that period became, admitting, "You start to think in terms of, I can't exist like this." Those words revealed a side of Clooney far removed from the Hollywood image. This was not an actor preparing for a difficult role. This was a person facing a battle where fame, awards, and recognition offered no protection. The world still saw the same familiar face, but behind that image was someone fighting through pain that affected every part of his life. After doctors identified the source of the problem, Clooney underwent treatment and began a long recovery. But the journey taught him something deeper than physical endurance. A man who had spent years being seen as the person who handled everything had to learn that accepting help was not a weakness. Sometimes, strength meant allowing others to stand beside you when you could no longer carry everything alone. That chapter became a turning point in the way Clooney saw himself. The injury did not define him, but it changed the person who walked away from it. He became more aware of suffering beyond his own world and continued expanding his humanitarian efforts, using his platform for causes larger than Hollywood. The pain remained part of his story, but it also became part of his perspective. George Clooney had spent years building an image of control. This experience taught him a deeper truth. Strength was never about pretending nothing could hurt you. It was about accepting the moments when life breaks your confidence, and still finding the courage to rebuild. Years before George Clooney became Hollywood's most famous bachelor, he experienced a heartbreak that quietly changed the way he viewed love, commitment, and himself. In 1984, when he was still a struggling actor far from the fame that would later arrive, Clooney met actress Talia Balsam. She was confident, accomplished, and came from a respected Hollywood family. Their relationship began during a time when both were searching for their future, and in 1989 they married in Las Vegas, believing they had found something that could last. But as Clooney fought to build a career, ambition slowly began taking more space in his life. Auditions, opportunities, and the uncertainty of Hollywood consumed his attention. While he was chasing the future he dreamed of, the relationship needed a presence and stability he was not always able to give. The marriage ended in 1993, but the impact lasted far longer than the divorce itself. Years later, Clooney did not portray himself as someone who had simply lost a relationship. Instead, he looked inward and accepted his own responsibility, saying, "I wasn't good at it. I wasn't someone who should have been married at that point." That chapter did not close without leaving a mark. It forced him to confront the parts of himself that success could never fix. Afterward, Clooney spent more than 2 decades as one of the world's most admired bachelors. He had fame, wealth, and the image of a man who seemed to have everything. For years, the world celebrated him as Hollywood's most desirable bachelor. But beneath that image was a man who had once walked away from love, believing it was safer not to risk losing again. The experience became part of the journey that shaped how he understood connection, responsibility, and the person he wanted to become. Yet George Clooney's story was never about a man incapable of love. It was about a man who continued changing long after the world believed it already knew him. The injury from Syriana showed him that even a strong body could break. The end of his first marriage showed him that even success could not replace emotional growth. Together, those experiences shaped the person he eventually became. The world came to know George Clooney as the symbol of confidence, elegance, and control. But the person behind that image was shaped not only by success, but by the moments when life humbled him, the battles he survived, the mistakes he accepted, and the lessons he carried quietly long after the cameras stopped. For more than 2 decades, George Clooney carried an image that seemed impossible to break. Hollywood's most admired bachelor, the man who appeared to have mastered fame, confidence, and independence. He had the career millions dreamed of, the respect of his peers, and a freedom many people envied. But behind that effortless charm was a man who had come to believe that marriage might no longer be part of his future. After the painful end of his first marriage to actress Talia Balsam in 1993, Clooney did not simply move on from a relationship that had ended. Years later, he looked back with honesty and accepted his own responsibility, admitting, "I wasn't good at it. I wasn't someone who should have been married at that point." It was not anger or bitterness that kept him away from marriage. It was the understanding that he had not yet become the person needed for that commitment. For years, independence felt safer than risking another relationship before he was ready. The men the world saw as fearless had quietly built a life where success was easier to control than love. Then, in 2013, an unexpected meeting began changing everything. George Clooney thought he understood about relationships. At his home on Lake Como, through a mutual friend, he met Amal Alamuddin, a human rights lawyer whose world could not have been further from Hollywood. She was not interested in celebrity, fame, or the attention surrounding his name. Her passion was international law, justice, and defending people whose voices had been ignored. For a man who had spent decades being recognized everywhere he went, meeting someone who did not need the Hollywood version of George Clooney was something different. Amal was not searching for the actor, the awards, or the reputation. She was meeting the person behind them. Their conversations moved beyond films and fame into ideas, values, and the world they wanted to influence. She did not ask him to become someone else. Instead, she showed him a future he had stopped imagining for himself. Years later, Clooney described the impact of meeting her, saying, "I didn't know how empty my life was until I met Amal. For the first time in decades, the man who had protected his independence so carefully began considering what it meant to build a life around someone else." What started as friendship slowly became something neither of them expected. Their connection grew through conversations, emails, humor, and a genuine curiosity about each other's worlds. George, who had spent years appearing completely comfortable with being alone, suddenly found himself valuing a kind of connection he had once avoided. Their relationship was not built on publicity or glamour. It was built on respect and the feeling of being understood. When Clooney eventually bought an engagement ring, it was not a public statement. It was a private decision from a man who had spent years convincing himself he was better without marriage. When he proposed at home, Amal was so surprised that she did not immediately answer. The silence lasted long enough for even a man known for confidence to wonder if he had taken the biggest emotional risk of his life. Later, he joked about that moment, but beneath the humor was something deeply human. A man who had spent decades controlling his own path, suddenly facing a future he could not control. When Amal finally said yes, George Clooney was not simply choosing a wedding. He was choosing vulnerability, responsibility, and a life built around someone other than himself. On September 27, 2014, George Clooney and Amal Alamuddin married in Venice at Amman Canal Grande, Venice. The world saw the beauty of the city, the elegance of the ceremony, and the details that surrounded the occasion. But the real significance of that day was not the luxury. It was the transformation of the man standing at the center of it. The person who once believed he was not built for marriage was now willingly accepting everything marriage required: compromise, commitment, and the responsibility of sharing his future with another person. The ceremony brought together people from both of their worlds, but the most important moment was not who attended. It was what the day represented. A man who had spent years protecting himself finally decided that love was worth the risk. marriage did not become effortless after the wedding. Once the celebrations ended and the attention moved elsewhere, George and Amal faced the reality of building a life together. Their careers demanded extraordinary commitment. George remained connected to Hollywood through acting, directing, producing, and humanitarian work. Amal continued her career as an internationally respected human rights lawyer, often working on cases involving some of the world's most difficult issues. Their lives required constant balance. Different countries, demanding schedules, and responsibilities that could easily create distance. But instead of seeing those challenges as reasons to step away, they adapted. They protected their time together, adjusted their priorities, and created homes that became places of stability away from public attention. For George, this represented a change far deeper than marriage itself. The man who once believed he was better alone discovered that commitment was not about losing freedom. It was about willingly sharing that freedom with someone who mattered. Amal became not only his wife, but also someone he deeply respected and admired. When speaking publicly about her work, George often made clear that her achievements stood on their own. Their relationship was never meaningful because it appeared perfect from the outside. It mattered because two people with demanding lives continued choosing each other through ordinary difficulties. In 2024, when George was preparing for his Broadway debut in Good Night and Good Luck while Amal remained in Europe with their children, public attention once again turned toward their marriage. The physical distance between them during a demanding professional period sparked speculation, including unfounded rumors of a possible divorce and reports placing a dramatic value on a potential settlement. Yet neither George nor Amal confirmed those claims. The reality appeared far simpler. Two people balancing demanding careers, family responsibilities, and the challenges of raising children while living between different commitments. Their story was never about creating a flawless image, but about maintaining something real in a world that constantly expected perfection. For George Clooney, the greatest change was realizing that love was not about finding an effortless life. It was about finding someone worth making sacrifices for. After learning how to open his life to another person, George faced an even greater challenge, becoming the father two children would need him to be. In June 2017, George and Amal welcomed twins Ella and Alexander, transforming the life of a man who once said he never imagined himself as a father. Clooney later admitted, "I didn't see myself as a father, but everything changed when his children arrived. I really didn't think at 56 that I would be the parent of twins," he later reflected. Don't make plans. You always have to just enjoy the ride. For a man who had spent decades carefully planning careers, directing projects, and building a life around independence, fatherhood introduced a responsibility that could not be controlled or scheduled. Later in life, when many people believe their story is already written, George Clooney discovered that some of the most meaningful chapters can begin after we stop expecting them. His world became shaped by quieter moments, family routines, time together, and a role far removed from the spotlight that had defined so much of his life. The Hollywood star, who once measured success through public achievements, slowly learned that the quietest moments could carry the greatest meaning. It was not premieres or awards that shaped him anymore. It was being present for his children, sharing ordinary moments, and creating a sense of home. George and Amal protected Ella and Alexander from unnecessary attention, choosing to give them a childhood built around privacy, stability, and love rather than fame. The man once known as Hollywood's eternal bachelor discovered that his greatest achievement was not becoming one of the world's biggest stars. It was becoming someone his younger self never believed he could become. The world remembers George Clooney for the moments when millions were watching, the films, the awards, and the characters that made him an icon. But the people closest to him remember the moments when the cameras were gone. The father waking up early, the husband choosing patience. The man who once believed strength meant needing no one discovered that true strength could also mean allowing others to need him. After a lifetime of being celebrated for the roles he played on screen, George Clooney found the role that mattered most beyond it all, becoming the man behind the spotlight. After decades of being recognized by millions, George Clooney discovered that the people who truly understood him were the ones who never cared about his fame. They knew him before the awards, before the cameras, and before the world decided who he was supposed to be. The family he built later in life gave him something Hollywood never could, a place where he was not an icon, not a movie star, but simply George. With Amal, Ella, and Alexander, he found the quiet moments and genuine connections that success could never create. But alongside the family he built, he also carried the memories of the people who knew him from the very beginning. One of those voices belonged to Rosemary Clooney, his aunt, a legendary performer whose life revealed both the beauty and burden of fame. She had stood before generations of audiences, carried songs across decades, and experienced the truth that even extraordinary success cannot stop time from changing everything. Years later, George reflected on how her relationship with music had evolved. Although she could no longer reach every note as she once had, he believed she had become an even better singer because she no longer needed to prove herself. As Rosemary explained, "Because I don't have to prove I can sing anymore." Those words stayed with George because they represented something far deeper than music, the understanding that a person's worth is not measured by applause or approval. When Rosemary died from lung cancer in 2002 at 74, George lost more than a famous aunt. He lost someone who understood the complicated relationship between talent, success, and identity. But years later, the deepest loss came from someone who represented an even earlier chapter of his life. When George said goodbye to his older sister, Adelia Ada Zeidler, he was not losing a connection to Hollywood. He was losing a connection to home. The world knew George Clooney, the actor. Ada knew George, the brother. Before the cameras, before the awards, before fame changed the way millions saw him, she knew the boy from Kentucky, the family memories they shared, the ordinary moments, and the person who existed before he became a global symbol. Losing Ada meant losing one of the last living connections to the man he had been before the world knew his name. While George's career carried him across the world, Ada built a quieter life in Kentucky, one measured not by fame, but by family, creativity, and the people she touched. She lived as an artist, an elementary school art teacher, and a mother, creating a legacy far away from the spotlight surrounding her brother. Her battle with cancer remained private, away from the attention surrounding George's public life. When Ada died on December 19, 2025, at 65, George did not speak as a Hollywood legend. He spoke as a younger brother who had lost someone impossible to replace. "My sister Ada was my hero," he said. Remembering her courage and humor, he added, "I've never met anyone so brave." They came the simplest words, the ones that revealed the deepest pain. "Amal and I will miss her terribly." No award, no achievement, and no public tribute could fully explain what Ada's absence meant. When she was gone, George did not lose only his sister. He lost one of the last people alive who could remind him who he was before the world told him who he had become. Rosemary and Ada lived completely different lives, yet together they left George with the same enduring lesson. Fame can make the world remember your name, but only love can preserve who you truly are. Today, with Amal, Ella, and Alexander beside him, George carries forward not only the achievements people celebrate, but also the memories of those who knew him before the spotlight. After spending a lifetime becoming unforgettable to millions, he discovered the greatest gift was never being admired by the world. It was being completely known by the people who loved him beyond the spotlight. At 65 years old, George Clooney is no longer chasing the version of success that once made him famous. For decades, the world knew him as the confident leading man, the actor with the effortless smile, the Hollywood icon who seemed to have everything under control. But the man standing today measures life differently. He is no longer defined by applause, box office numbers, or headlines. The person who once spent years fighting to be recognized now values the moments that do not require an audience. Away from cameras and red carpets, his life is built around family, purpose, and the quiet experiences fame could never provide. At Villa Oleandra on Lake Como, where his life changed after meeting Amal in 2013, George discovered something greater than luxury. To the world, it is a legendary Italian estate. To him, it represents the place where he became not only a movie star, but the husband and father he once believed he would never become. The greatest irony of his journey is that the man who once appeared to have everything eventually discovered that the things that mattered most were never the things he could buy. They were the people who gave his life meaning. That transformation was shaped by the battles he survived. The injury he suffered while filming Syriana became one of the most humbling experiences of his life. For a man whose career was built on confidence and independence, the hardest part was accepting that even someone who appeared unbreakable could still need help. The experience forced Clooney to confront vulnerability in a way fame never had. It changed how he viewed time, health, and the importance of the people around him. Instead of allowing pain to define him, he carried forward a deeper appreciation for compassion and the fragile nature of life. Professionally, George never truly walked away from Hollywood, but he stopped chasing attention simply to prove himself. From Ticket to Paradise to directing The Boys in the Boat and bringing Good Night and Good Luck to Broadway, his choices reflected a different purpose, not proving that he belonged, but creating stories that still mattered to him. Beyond entertainment, George Clooney's understanding of purpose expanded even further. Together with Amal, he used their influence to support justice, human rights, and freedom through the Clooney Foundation for Justice. The work reflected a belief that having a voice also creates a responsibility to use it for those who are often unheard. The same man who once wanted the world to notice him became someone willing to use his visibility so others could be seen. The success he built through acting, directing, producing, investments, and Casamigos gave him freedom, but his legacy has never been defined by what he owns. It has been defined by what he chooses to protect and what he chooses to give. The man who once believed he was not built for marriage or fatherhood discovered a completely different kind of fulfillment. His greatest achievements are no longer found only in awards or career milestones, but in ordinary moments away from the spotlight, being present for Amal, Ella, and Alexander, and watching his family grow. The world remembers the films, the awards, and the image of effortless confidence. But the people closest to him remember something deeper. The husband who learned patience, the father who found a new purpose, and the man who once believed strength meant standing alone, only to discover that true strength can also mean having someone worth protecting. George Clooney spent decades becoming unforgettable to the world. But the greatest chapter of his life was not written when millions were watching. It was written in the quiet moments no camera captured, when he chose love over independence, purpose over applause, and humanity over perfection. After a lifetime of playing unforgettable characters on screen, George Clooney finally discovered the role that mattered most beyond Hollywood. Not the actor, not the star, not the legend, but the man behind the spotlight. If George Clooney's journey touched you, remember the chapter that stayed with you the most. The struggles before fame, the love that transformed his life, or the purpose he found beyond Hollywood. Because behind every famous face is a story of battles, choices, and moments the world never sees. And sometimes, the greatest mark we leave behind is not the fame we achieve, but the humanity we give to others.